Hey guys, so I usually blog this, but I think I'm going to do a vlog this time in response to this video of Preston's because when I watched it it didn't make much sense to me, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it and then I'm going to go through it and just kind of respond point by point. So, uh that's how I'm going to do it. So, here we go.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and we are continuing our review and refutation of Lance Conley's book, Hope Resurrected. And we're now in chapter 8. As I mentioned to you, we have given more than enough attention to his claims about the time statements meaning nothing. Now, don't forget, Mr. Conley told us on the one hand that time statements of imminence, when used in regard to non-eschatological events, indicated imminence. But when those same identical words in the same identical Greek tenses are used of eschatological events, they don't mean anything. All they mean now is certainty. It's so presuppositional. Well, after a couple of days of review, all of a sudden, Mr. Conley flip-flopped and actually admitted that the Greek word mello, for instance, can indicate imminence in prophetic texts. He'll probably come unglued on that, but I have it all copied and pasted, all documented. And so on the one hand, he tells us that mello only indicates imminence if it's not eschatology, turns right around and says, well, actually, mello can indicate imminence in eschatological texts. Well, I'm sorry, that's a totally self-defeating argument. So, as I pointed out at the very beginning of our examination of his arguments on the time statements, if even one New Testament time statement of imminence referring to the second coming indicated genuine objective imminence, then this entire book goes down the drain.
All right, so the first thing I'm going to say is he's taken me out of context for the last 7 to 8 videos because I have repeatedly said that mellow can mean imminence, and I've said that repeatedly for years. I mean, mellow can mean imminence. It says it in the lexicon, in Thayer's lexicon, that it can mean imminence. It can also mean certainty, and I've also pushed that fact too, that it often means certainty. And if you go look in the Thayer's lexicon, you can go look it up on BibleTools.com. I think that's what it's called. I use it all the time. It uses the words mellow for imminence. It uses it for certainty. Uh, you know, because in Acts when Paul's talking about the resurrection to that one guy, Felix, I think it is, he says it will take place. Well, if it's about imminence, then that would mean that it needs to happen in like 15 minutes or something. You know, like it's got to happen right then and now, and that's not what happens. It happens if it was in 70 AD, like Preston wants to say, then the resurrection would have to be like, it wouldn't be 15 years, give or take. It would be way sooner than that, But that's just one problem, and even Kenneth Gentry, I've quoted him in my book. Uh, Kenneth Gentry even admits this. He goes and talks about how the word mellow can mean certainty, and it does mean it in like that context, and that's an eschatological context, because Paul's being eschatological there, so obviously it means certainty in that case. And, it can mean in some eschatological times, it can mean imminence. But in most cases, it does mean certainty. Because if it was imminence, then we have to prove that, that Christ came back in 70 AD, which, we have no proof of that. So that's a problem. But anyways, the problem is Preston's over here just taking me out of context here, and he's done this for like the past 8 videos, and it's kind of getting ridiculous at this point. But we'll go on, I guess.
How has Mr. Conley responded to that? He has said, well, if those New Testament time statements are taken in a genuine sense, then we are following a failed eschatology. No, Mr. Conley. It is you and all futurists who want to deny, mitigate, pervert, destroy an entire vocabulary of words of imminence and say they didn't really mean anything except certain. It was impossible for those time words of imminence to mean eminence, just certain. Well, you can't prove that. It's a horrible argument, but all that aside, here is Mr. Conley that is arguing that time statements really honestly do not mean anything in regard to imminence, in regard to the day of the Lord, the coming, the judgment, the resurrection. And yet I have demonstrated to you from Matthew 10, 22 and 23, from Matthew 16, 27, 28. Oh, by the way, on which Mr. Conley once again did a flip-flop. In his book, he said that Matthew 16, 27 is the second coming.
Now, that is not true one bit. When you go and read that, it does not say, I do not say that Matthew 10 is about the second coming. I also do not say that Matthew 16 is about the second coming. But fact is, once you get past all these adjectives and verbs that Preston goes on about, Preston can't prove that Christ lost his body in the ascension. He can't prove that 1 Corinthians 15 is about spiritual death, and he can't make it about only spiritual stuff. So in the end, he stuck with his take on time texts, and for him, it always has to be imminent, right? And so he's stuck on that. And when you have only that to go on, then you have to then all he's got is an argument of silence that Jesus came back in 70 AD. Because can he provide historical evidence that Jesus came back in 70 AD? No. Can he prove that the dead rose from their graves in 70 AD? No. To the contrary, we have all the early church fathers claiming that it is all future. So if Preston were right about the time text, we logically would have to conclude, like many atheist Bible critics have said, that it is a failed doomsday cult. So this, it is what it is. Like, if we're going to take it the way that Preston wants it to be, since he can't prove most of the claims that he's made, it is a failed doomsday cult. What else can it be? Jesus didn't come back in 70 AD. The dead didn't rise from their graves, like Paul said. Are we going to call Paul a liar? Are we going to call Jesus a liar? Well, are we going to do that? I don't know. I don't want to do that, and I don't plan on doing that. But that's the logical conclusion that one would come to. And, he keeps saying stuff that I haven't really actually said. I don't know why you can't be honest about it and just take people in context. But if you go and read my book and my blog, I do show where and how Preston's either lying or misrepresenting me by taking me out of context. Matthew 16 is about either the transfiguration, resurrection, or the ascension. It's not about the second coming. When I wrote that part in the book, I was being open-ended. And so by being open-ended, I didn't declare my position. I didn't declare it in fullness, right? Because, I want people to come to their own conclusions too. But so he takes me out of context there, and that's kind of ridiculous. Because I've had multiple people read it through to me, and they go, "No, you weren't talking about the second coming." And I was like, "Yeah, no duh, right?" But yeah, kind of crazy. And what does it really matter if I wrote 2 pages? It's a primer. Like, this whole thing is that chapter is a primer for the refutations. So whatever, man.
Facebook when that backfired on him, he said, no, Matthew 16:27 is not the second coming. Well, then he equivocated again and said, well, it's about the transfiguration. Well, guess what, folks? The transfiguration was a vision of the second coming. Therefore, since the transfiguration was a visionary confirmation of Jesus' prediction of his coming in judgment in that generation, then since the transfiguration was a vision of his second coming, that means that Mr. Conley has once again fatally impaled himself on his own arguments.
Just a note here. When he talks about the transfiguration being the second coming, isn't that optical? So like all the past two video, or maybe it's 2 or 3 videos that he's had for this whole past week have been about how Jesus' second coming was not going to be optical and that it was all non-literal. Okay, so what the heck did Peter and all the apostles see there? Because seems pretty optical to me. But hey, maybe they just hallucinated it or something. Who knows? Because Preston doesn't really make much sense there. But I digress. Let's keep going.
But we must go on. In chapter 8, and I have to tell you, I was a little bit amazed at the brevity of this particular chapter. Now, I do want to say this.
So great.
First of all, this chapter 8, is only 2 pages and 6 lines long.
Man.
And this particular chapter does not contain, I want to give credit.
Wow.
Does not contain the multitudinous grammatical typological errors of the previous chapters.
I didn't make mistakes in my book. Wow. Congratulations, Lance. Fascinating.
For that, but it is a fact. But here's the interesting, here's the intriguing,
so great.
Here's the ironic thing about this. On Facebook, over and over and over and over again, Mr. Conley has attacked me on the issue of election.
Yes, this is the one true fact in this whole video. I have attacked him on election. Let's keep going.
And he said election is the death knell to Preston and full preterism.
Because it is.
They can't answer the doctrine of election.
Because he can't, and none of them can.
Well, I have answered it on Facebook.
Nope.
And other forums.
Nope.
But of course, he just ignores what I have to say, continuing to claim that I don't even address the issue.
Ridiculing people, diverting from the answer, or diverting from the question, dodging the question, etc., etc. That is not answering the question. Sorry, buddy. I'm actually kind of shocked you're trying to do a video on election, to be totally honest. I actually figured you would try to skip this whole thing. But hey, whatever. It's good. I like to see this. I like to see them falling flat on their face with this. So, yeah.
Now, what strikes me so strange is this. Here is a doctrine, i.e. the election, that Mr. Conley claims is foundational to his attack against covenant eschatology. It is the crux interpretum. It's the key. And yet he spends 2 pages and 7 lines on that doctrine.
Well, first of all, it is a primer, so it doesn't have to be that long, obviously. Secondly, I cover this all. If you had actually read this stuff, which I'm not sure that you actually have, I do cover all of this in the refutation sections of Max King, where I refuted Max King, and I also do some refutation in the refutations I do of your book, Mr. Preston. I also do one against Ed Stevens. So, yeah, I have covered it. Just because it's not in there doesn't mean that I haven't covered it. So, plus it's a primer chapter. So, it's kind of ridiculous, buddy. Sorry, not going to work for you there.
Now, that's after writing probably, I haven't counted them, but there's probably, about 19 pages, 18 pages on time statements. So 2 pages, 7 lines, election, 18 or 19 pages on time statements.
Okay,
Utterly
good.
failing in his attack on the time statements. And let me say this to prepare for our next video on the election next week. Mr. Conley's claims on the election are some of the most presuppositional. Now, I'm not trying to be ugly, but I'm just telling you, when you read his comments, there are so many presuppositions underlying his claims that he makes no attempt whatsoever to prove.
Well, that's not true. I do prove it in the refutations, like I've said repeatedly.
Now, look, I can make claims all day long. If I don't have the exegetical, the hermeneutical, the logical evidence to support my claim, I haven't proven one thing.
Well, you just said exactly why everybody doesn't believe in full preterism, because you can't prove that Jesus in the ascension burned his body up and got rid of his humanity. You just do eisegesis. You can't prove 1 Corinthians 15 is spiritual only, because guess what? All of this is eisegesis that you got from Max King. So, yeah, sorry. It's funny you make that claim, since you're the one that does that all the time.
And so, I'll just lay a little bit of groundwork today, and then we will proceed in next week's video to get down to some of the meat. And
I'm sure we're going to get very much into the meat.
90, Mr. Conley says, eklektos, which is translated as election, is always definitive and temporal.
Yep, it is always definitive and temporal. That is correct. That's not a presupposition. The Greek language does not allow for it to be anything else other than definitive and temporal.
In both testaments of the Bible, once election ends, it ends.
Yes, it does. It is a noun and can be a verb, and once it is done, it is finished. So once you vote, a vote is over. You voted. No re-election. There's no recount, because God doesn't make mistakes. So, sorry.
There is no more selection to be had since the process is complete.
Yes.
For example, if election took place in 70 AD, there is no more to have happened post AD 70, because the election would be completed. In order for there to be a new election, one would have to be specified in Scripture, and there is none.
Exactly. There is no mention of a new election. If you can find that, you might have saved your argument a little bit, but there's not one. There's nowhere in the New Testament, in the 23 times that eklektos is mentioned, where it talks about a new election to take place, where God will elect people after the second coming. There's just nothing like that in there. So the burden of proof is on you, Mr. Preston.
As a matter of fact, Romans 11:25-27 shows us that once God completes his number of Gentiles, and it is filled, that all of the Gentiles who are of the elect will be saved. Then all Israel shall be saved. All Jew and Gentile believers of the elect who chose Christ were chosen in 70 AD, if preterism is true, and it would be over. There are so many errors in this paragraph.
Well, I'm going to show you that there's not. So one second here, bear with me. Make sure that this is up. Come on. Okay, here we go. All right, so here we have Romans 11:25-27. All right. Now, I'm going to show you audience relevance here, guys. Lest you, he's talking to the church, lest you, and so the church is Israel, by the way, lest you, Israel, be wise in your Israel own sight, I, Paul, do not want you, the church, to be unaware of this mystery, brothers, which is Israel. A partial hardening has come upon Israel, talking about the Jews, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, and he will banish ungodliness from Jacob. And this will be my covenant with them. And when I take away their sins. Obviously, that's about Israel. That's about the Jew and Gentile in Christ that are Israel, the church. So, sorry. Oh, and by the way, Preston tried to make this thing where, that it's presuppositional, that, that's numerical. Well, sorry, Preston, that doesn't work either. Looky here. So the word for fullness is called pleroma. And if you go and read Romans 11:25 through 28, and you look at the context of the Greek language, it's going to mean just like, pleroma says, where it says that which has been filled, a ship inasmuch as it is filled, man with sailors, rowers, and soldiers. In the New Testament, the body of believers, as to which it is filled with the presence, power, agency, riches of God and of Christ. That which fills, or with which a thing is filled. Of those things which a ship is filled, freight and merchandise, sailors, oarsmen, soldiers, completeness, or fullness of time, of fullness, abundance, of fulfilling, a keeping. Okay, so just so you know, this is used the same way in Mark 8 when they're filling up the fish baskets, and the baskets are filled to the brim with fish, okay? And it's used the same way. It's used the same way here in Romans 11:25 through 27, where it says that the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. What it's saying is that the number of Gentiles will be filled to the brim. So this is obviously a nod to salvation, and thus election is tied to salvation. If we didn't, this is pretty obvious stuff, but it's not really a presupposition. It's just like a fact, obviously. But I digress. We're going to keep going here and try to finish off this video. But did you guys realize that it took him 8 minutes to get to the actual topic? I'm just saying, that's pretty wild.
Number one, it automatically says, if Christ came in AD 70, then the election is over. Well, you see, that's based upon the presupposition that after the coming of the Lord, which Mr. Conley believes occurs at the end of time, the passing of heaven and earth, okay? That's his presuppositional view of eschatology. It's what he's bringing into, reading into this paragraph. At the coming of the Lord, all evangelism ends. At the coming of the Lord...
Well, the gospel has been revealed to all mankind, so yes, it all would end in 70 AD if full preterism were true. It's not continually going out to every nation and every place if Christ has already come. It's not how it works. The elect is a certain number, so you can't have it be that it just continually goes. You can't have election be redefined and go on forever. The word has not changed for 2,000 years. You're not going to be the first person to ever change the Greek language into something you want it to be just so it can fit full preterism for you. That's not how it works. Sorry.
There is no more election. There's no more salvation being offered, because that's the end. That's the end of the age. That's the end of the gospel preaching.
You can't have salvation continue if all Israel will be saved in 70 AD. It doesn't say anywhere that salvation will continue for anybody post 70 AD. It leaves it at that, where once the election is complete, salvation ends. You don't get a chance to go be the elect. You're part of the loipoi, which loipoi is the others. That's what it means in the Greek. It means the others. It's the antonym of election. It's the antonym of the eklektos. It's the not chosen. So you're not one of the chosen if you're one of the loipoi. And if you're not part of this election, you're you're not part of it, obviously.
And he gives us Romans 11, 25 to 27 as somehow, with no exegesis, by the way. Okay. Romans 11, 25 to 27 somehow proves that. Now, mind you, please notice, all he did was make claims. There is not one line of actual exegesis. Not one.
Well, it is a primer.
There is not one exegetical analysis. There's just the claim, well, see, Romans 11, all Gentiles will be saved. The full number of the Gentiles will be saved at the coming of the Lord, and that's when Israel is saved, therefore nobody's saved after that.
Okay, so here's the problem for Don, okay? So if the Gentiles number has been filled, which it says that is what's going to happen in Romans 11, 25 through 27, if there's no more Gentiles to come in and become part of Israel, then no more Gentiles can come into Israel. Then none of them can be grafted in. And if that's the case, all Israel will be saved. And all Israel must have been saved in 70 AD if Don Preston were right about the time text. And, you know, it is what it is. Salvation has come for Israel in 70 AD according to his paradigm, and therefore we can't be saved anymore. There's no way around this for Preston, unfortunately for him. I mean, it's just kind of laughable at some point. You got to kind of laugh at this whole thing.
Well, let me say again, I could make any kind of claim without offering evidence. You know, I could make.
Maybe it's kind of like when you talk about the Hebraic mindset and you've never actually given the Hebraic mindset. You just keep interposing Greek concepts into what you claim is the Hebraic mindset. Just a thought.
The claim that I was at Lake Eufaula and I saw a version of Nessie. But if I didn't have any evidence for it, people would be really right to be skeptical about that.
The irony of him mentioning the Loch Ness Monster or whatever he just did, the whole irony of it is that's an argument of silence, and full preterism is an entire argument based off of silence. Just saying.
There's got to be some evidence.
Yes, there does have to be evidence, and you don't have any.
And Mr. Conley gives no evidence whatsoever.
Maybe you should read the rest of the book.
I'm going to leave you with this thought. Mr. Conley says salvation, evangelism, time ends at the coming of the Lord. No. The current Christian age, the age of Christ and the New Covenant, the age which the Old Testament writers called the age to come, and which Mr. Conley himself admits had already broken into the Old Covenant world, the Old Covenant, this age. So, the New Testament writers, the Old Testament writers tell us that the age to come would never end. The Old Covenant age would. Okay? So the Old Covenant age, if it's true that election would end at the end of an age, and if it's true that the only age that was supposed to end was the Mosaic age, then guess what? That means election was to end at the end of the Old Covenant age.
That is not true. The election is supposed to be for all of the Old and New Covenant people. They are not a separate people. What happened was the Old Covenant people, the Old Covenant elect, were waiting on the fulfillment of the New Covenant so that they could all be part of the New Covenant. Now, when the New Covenant is installed on the cross, not the parousia like he claims it is, once it's installed, then they're still waiting for the second coming to take place. And until the second coming takes place, election does not end. Because if you go read Matthew 24:31, it says that the elect will be gathered, and then he will come, and, take with that what you will. But the elect the election ends in the second coming. So if it happened in 70 AD, election ended, then that means that it ended for all of the old covenant and new covenant elect. Just because the old covenant ended at the cross, just because it was fulfilled on the cross and the new covenant was installed, does not mean that the old covenant elect ceased to exist. That's a weird argument that he just tried there. But yeah, the old covenant and the new covenant, they're both the people of faith. They're both the people being called by God. So this whole idea that Preston just concocted there makes no sense. It makes absolutely zero sense.
And Mr. Conley has just impaled himself.
Yeah, right.
Again. All right. Hey, don't forget.
All right. So, my last little bit here. When he talks about Christian age, I'm assuming he means the new covenant. The new covenant can still be eternal, even if it's not for us. Just so you know, the promises of the old are fulfilled in the new, and the new is promised for the elect. The elect were elected in 70 AD if full preterist time statements are to be taken like he wants them to be, right? So, therefore, election must be over. And there can be no elect post 70 AD without him adding to the scripture, because there is no new election spoken of in the New Testament. Okay? So, it's all just silly. The basics here is, if Romans 11 is fulfilled, all of Israel, all the Jews and Gentile elect were saved in 70 AD, and that means there can be no more. There can be no more to come in as part of the faith, because election is tied to salvation. I mean, it's really that simple. And what makes him think that he's part of this promise of that kingdom without end? That kingdom without end was for the elect, and so therefore, if they were all elected in 70 AD. The promise was fulfilled for them, and they received the kingdom without end in some way or another. Okay? He prepared the kingdom for them. Everyone that's not his are not part of it. They're the loi poi. They're outside. It's as simple as that. But hey, thanks for anybody that was watching. I appreciate it. He cannot if he tries to redefine election here, it's going to completely screw up everything for him, because I mean, you can prove without a doubt that the Greek does not teach any of that. The word has stayed the same. Eclectos has stayed the same for 2,000 plus years. It's not going to change, and Preston trying to change it's not going to work either. So he's got a very big problem going on here. If anybody's got any questions, I will give like 2 minutes to do ask a question, and I'll do it for the next 2 minutes, and I'll end it at 35 minutes. I'll just wait a little bit and see if anybody decides to ask a question here. I see one person's on, but I think it's Isaac. Oh boy. Yeah, but he really has no answers, honestly. Like this video was kind of, I kind of laughed at it, to be honest, because it doesn't really work. How many shots did you take for every time you said Mr. Conley? None, because I'm not allowed to drink right now because of a pill that I'm having to take for the last surgery that I had on my knee replacement. So wasn't allowed to take shots, but if I did, I'm sure that I would have been very drunk. So all right, 30 more seconds. Yep. So that is going to be the end of this video, guys. Thanks for watching, and God bless you all. May any full preterists watching this consider giving up full preterism and repent.